The good news is, for those who don't like charts, we're going to spend very little time on the chart and very much time in the book. So, does anyone recognize the little miniature chart at the top of page 1? It's a very small version of last week's chart. It's also here on the board. Okay, and then we have a very large chart that takes up most of page 1. So, can anyone guess how the large chart fits in to the small part? It's a magnification of a part, of a section of the small chart.
Breakdown of the timeline?
No, not post-exile. It's pre-exile, but it is leading up to it. You're right. So you see a list of names on the left. Those are kings, names of kings, father to son, all descendants of David, a direct dynasty. So if you look at the little chart at the top, you see this. What we're looking at on the big chart is this section of this, right here.
That's the kings.
The kings. So you would see, if we listed them horizontally, we'd see Uzziah, and then Jotham, and then Ahaz, and then Hezekiah, and Manasseh, and Ammon, and Josiah. So you see how this is it's just this chart, but instead of going horizontally, we're listing them vertically. Okay. Now, the most significant fact of this, we're going to talk a little bit more about the timeline, but the most significant timeline fact that you can get is that this timeline spans this. So what was this event here? Anybody know?
The exile?
The exile for the northern kingdom, not the exile that gets talked about much more for Judah. Right. Assyria came down and took away the northern kingdom and almost took the southern kingdom too. They tried their very best. If it were not for God's intervention, they definitely would have, because I can't remember how many soldiers, but I feel like it was over 100,000 soldiers that God came and just killed. Anyway, so God intervened and the southern kingdom was not taken. Okay, so let's see. Penny, would you read verse 1 of chapter 1 of Micah? It's in a box on the top of page 1. All the text we need will be in the notes. So,
the word of the Lord that came to Micah of Morseth during the reign of Jotham, Asa, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, the vision he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem.
Okay, so the vision he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem, what's the significance of those two cities?
They were places of worship.
That's right, they were places of worship. The southern kingdom worshipped at the temple in Jerusalem. What about Samaria? What do you know about Samaria?
They were mixed culture.
Okay, well, pause. In the New Testament times, that whole region was named Samaria after this city. That's what you're thinking of. At this time, Samaria is the capital of the northern kingdom. So you've got the capital of Judah, the southern kingdom, and the capital of Israel, the northern kingdom. So that's what it's about. Now, time period. You see how we have listed on our chart over on the far right when Hosea ministered and when Isaiah ministered. There's like a reddish line showing the time of their ministry. The lines fade because it's hard to tell when their ministries start exactly. But based on verse 1, what time period does Micah minister?
Almost the same as Isaiah.
Yes, very good. So he lists 3 kings. Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So if you want to just add an extra line there for Micah, when I got this chart, there was a line there. And I had to laboriously delete it so that you would get to do it yourselves. You see how the list of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah? Yeah, it spans those kings. So you can add that in so you know where he is. Now, once you see that he spans down through Hezekiah, you see that, well, I don't know if you see, but that's when the northern kingdom fell, during Hezekiah's reign. So most of his ministry was leading up to that. Okay, and then one last fact that we can glean from verse 1 is that if the word of the Lord came to Micah during the reign of 3 different kings, what does that tell you about how God's word came to him? How or when?
Came to him over time.
Right. It's not just one vision he saw one night or one dictation he heard one day. It was over the course of decades, which means that the book of Micah is a compilation of prophecies and sermons and writings of Micah that it seems that he put together then later in his ministry, put together all these things that God had shown him into a book. But initially, they would have been presented orally. Obviously, because when he was getting a vision from God during Jotham's reign, he may have presented that, he may have written it down, to save, but towards the end, he put them all together into this book that we have. So the book is a compilation. Okay. Any questions about the chart or when Micah was ministering?
We were just wanting to make sure where we're supposed to put Micah, over where Isaiah and Hosea, you said put a line there and put Micah?
Yeah, so let me just, right there, that I added a black line there,
Yeah.
basically next to Isaiah. Okay, good question. Anything else?
You said Samaria was the capital of
The northern kingdom. Yes. So, anyone find Micah a drag to read? I know Sharon did. She said, what a depressing book. It's just all about punishment this and punishment that. I am summarizing and slightly exaggerating what she said. But there's a lot of serious stuff, serious punishment. And it's beneficial for us for a lot of reasons, but one of them is so that we get to know God and how he deals with people. There's some things that God takes very seriously. Okay, so page 2 is the structure of the book. This shows us that Micah put together his book very carefully under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And it's not just a bunch of stuff slapped together. It's a very careful arrangement. Micah is neatly arranged into 3 parts. We're going to call them cycles because each one is a cycle. as you'll see. And each cycle has two halves. A group of judgment prophecies and then a group of salvation prophecies. Now, the first cycle only has one salvation prophecy, but the other two have multiple. So, you got the judgment and the salvation. Okay. So, what we're going to do is go through the book piece by piece and look for who is being prophesied against, what they did, and what their punishment is going to be. Sometimes he won't say all of those, but if he does. So let's look at the first cycle there. This is still on page 2. You see the first cycle is chapters 1 and 2. And the first of the judgment prophecies is verses 2 through 7. So we're going to fill in the blank because whose judgment is prophesied in 2 through 7? We're going to turn over and look at it, and then we'll turn back and fill it in. If you want to tear this page out so you don't have to turn back, that is fine. You are allowed to do that. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, so the first one we'll do together, and then we'll see if we can do any of them. All of us do it silently. We'll see if that works. Let's see. Ruth, would you like to read 2 through 7 for the class? And then we're looking for the main thing is, who is this prophecy against? The second thing is, what did they do, if it says. And the third thing is, what's the punishment going to be, if it says.
Hear, you peoples, all of you, listen, earth and all who live in it, that the sovereign Lord may bear witness against you, the Lord from his holy temple. Look, the Lord is coming from his dwelling place. He comes down and treads on the heights of the earth. The mountains melt beneath him and the valleys split apart. Like wax before the fire, like water rushing down a slope. All this is because of Jacob's transgression, because of the sins of the people of Israel. What is Jacob's transgression? Is it Samaria? What is Judah's high place? Is it not Jerusalem? Therefore I will make Samaria a heap of rubble, a place for planting vineyards. I will pour her stones into the valley and lay bare her foundations. All her idols will be broken to pieces. All her temple gifts will be burned with fire. I will destroy all her images. Since she gathered her gifts from the wages of prostitutes, as the wages of prostitutes, they will again be used.
Okay. So, who is this, looking back at page 2, who is this prophecy against? Yeah, Samaria. Good. And what did they do to deserve this punishment? Does it say anything they did? Idols. Very good. Possibly also temple prostitutes. That in the ancient pagan world, shrine prostitutes were a very common thing. It was a way to raise money for the temple, and it was considered a way of worshiping your pagan deity. So it would be cultural equivalent if our church had a car wash to raise money for something for our church. We would provide a service to people, and they could come to our church, get a car wash, and they're thinking, well, it goes to a good cause, it goes to the church, and I also get my car washed. So they're thinking, well, it goes to the temple, and I also get to have this pleasure. So I know that's a very loose cultural comparison, but it gives you an idea of how they could consider that worship.
Jacob, when we were in Israel in 19 with the Merrills, they actually showed us an area where they had little gatherings where they took the women were waiting for the men when they came in off the fields. And they said they were prostitutes.
Yeah, that definitely happened in Jerusalem under the reign of Manasseh and probably others. Manasseh brought many pagan deities into the temple. And, yeah. Okay, but the big one is idols. And then what's the punishment? So that's who it's about. It's about Samaria. That's what they did. Now, what is the punishment?
The idols would be destroyed.
The idols will be destroyed. Good. What else?
Gonna make Samaria a heap of rubble.
Yes, a heap of rubble. It's going to be a place to plant vineyards because there's not going to be any buildings left. Right? We could not plant a vineyard right here because there's concrete and stone under us. But if this was all destroyed, then you could. Good. And then there's a little clue as to how it's going to happen if you think about it. If a foreign army comes in and takes all your treasure, well, what's the type of thing that foreign soldiers from Assyria might use that money for that they get as plunder? Well, they might use it for prostitutes as they're traveling around from place to place, taking over. Okay. So that's the first prophecy. Now, we can't spend that long on every one, or we'll be here too long, but that's how it goes. So, let's see if we can each silently look over the next prophecy, which is 8 through 16, and see if you can figure out any of those. You can look for who it's against, or you can look for what they've done or what the punishment will be. You don't have to start in verse 8. You can just scan through that and see if you pick up any of those pieces. Anybody find any?
Says it spread to Judah.
Yeah. Okay, good. So you're looking at verse 9, I assume?
Yes.
For Samaria's plague is incurable, it spread to Judah. Now, what do you think is saying it spread to Judah? What is it? Yeah, the sin. That's true. So, and that's, I think that's made a little more explicit down below. But, yeah, so the sin of Samaria has spread to Judah. That's true. But it's also probably a double meaning because the punishment that's coming to Samaria also spreads to Jerusalem. It was all through Judah and up to, it says, to the very gate of my people. So what happened was, let me just give a little map. See, Al and Bev, I bet you sailed on this lake, right? And maybe got baptized in this river, okay? And maybe saw the Dead Sea. And Jerusalem is right here, and Samaria is somewhere around here. And so these are the countries of Israel and Judah, the two kingdoms. So the armies of Assyria came down and took Samaria, and then after they captured Samaria and the whole country, then they went down into Judah and they took town after town after town. They took every, I think it lists how many, I feel like it's 46, but that number could be wrong. And they got all the way up to the gate of Jerusalem, and they wanted them to surrender. There's a whole description of that in other parts of the Bible. They had, the city was besieged, but then they were delivered. Under the ministry of Isaiah, the city of Jerusalem was delivered, and it wasn't not taken over. So, the punishment that came to the northern kingdom came all through Judah. Look, it says it spread to Judah, and it reached the very gate of my people, even Jerusalem itself. It came right up to the gates of Jerusalem. That's the army of Sennacherib. So the sin spread to Judah, and therefore the punishment also spread to Judah. Very good. Down again in the second half of verse 12, I underlined it. Hopefully it's underlined in yours. Disasters come from the Lord, even to the gate of Jerusalem. You who live in Lachish, that was probably the number 2 best fortified city in Judah. That city fell to Assyria. And then it says, at the end of verse 13, for the transgressions of Israel were found in you. So the stuff that the northern kingdom was doing, the sins, they were found also in cities of Judah. And now verse 14, the second half there says, the town of Akzib will prove deceptive to the kings of Israel. Well, that's a city of Judah. So why would kings of Israel be down in another country, in Judah? And then it says, well, just what do you think? Why would there be people from Israel down in a town of Judah? Can you guess? Picture the armies coming.
They're running away.
Yeah, they're running away. They're fleeing south. Okay. I'll bring a conqueror against you who live in Mareshah. The nobles of Israel will flee to Adullam. These little towns are all interesting, right around Micah's hometown. A bunch of little towns in the same area where people fled to. So the nobles of Israel will flee to Adullam, and then turn the page. For the children in whom you delight. Let's see, what does it say? Oh, shave your head in mourning for the children in whom you delight. Make yourself bald as the vulture, for they will go from you into exile. You can flee to another country, but the Assyrians are going to get you. And they did. They got everything in both countries except for Jerusalem. Which means that the nation, because that's the capital city, the nation of Judah survived that attack. Okay. Any questions about the second prophecy? So, it was against Jerusalem. It was because they did the same sins. And the punishment was, well, the armies would come right up to the very gates of the capital. Again, we're spending too much time.
And it explains a lot. We understand it more.
Yeah, yes. Alas, alack. We should do a whole 12-week course on just Micah, and then we really get it good, but we can't do it. Unless you want this program to take 20 years, and then you get your graduation certificate. Okay. Well, I'm just going to give you 2:1 through 5. Actually, let's just look at verse 2. 2:2. Let's see. Could someone read? Kathy, could you read 2:2?
They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them. They defraud people of their homes. They rob them of their inheritance.
Now, so there are people who get land. They want to get, if you get a ton of land, you're going to make more money, you're going to be richer. But what's the problem with doing that?
Against the law.
It's against the law, yeah. If you were a poor person in in a Jewish poor person back then, the law was the most you could do was rent your land out for a certain amount of years, but it had to come back to your family. That would be a possession of your family forever. That was God's plan, which was a good plan because it did not allow a family to sink into abject poverty. There would always be a time of being restored, a year of Jubilee. But that law was being ignored, and so some people were getting rich, and then everyone else was just reduced to peasant workers. Okay, so that's a prophecy against what we could call land grabbers. And then the fourth prophecy in the first cycle, 6 through 11. Let's see, where are we at? Loretta, could you read chapter 2, verse 11? It's underlined there. It's on the right column.
Chapter 2, verse 11?
Yeah.
Okay. If a liar and deceiver comes and says, I will prophesy for you plenty of wine and beer, that would be just the prophet for this people. I will surely...
Oh, that's good, right there, just that verse. So you have people coming, prophets coming and saying, everything's going to be great. You're going to have a big celebration. Everything's going to be happy for you. And people liked that kind of prophecy. But that was not what was going to happen. So Micah is a true prophet, but there were many false prophets at the time. Okay, so false prophets there. It would be the blank there on 2 through 11. Okay, and that is the final prophecy of the final judgment prophecy of the first cycle. And you can see there's only 2 verses left. I highlighted, hopefully, those asterisks in yellow. Did I do that on your notes? Yeah, to say, now we get to see the first salvation prophecies. So it's the end of the first cycle. So, Sharon, could you read 12 and 13? This is the salvation prophecies of cycle 1.
I will surely gather all of you, Jacob. I will surely bring together the remnant of Israel. I will bring them together like sheep in a pen, like a flock in its pasture. The place will throng with people. The one who breaks open the way will go up before them. They will break through the gate and go out. Their king will pass through before them, the Lord at their head.
Okay. So at the end of this big, long judgment against these different groups and different sins, then he says, I'm going to bring together a remnant of Israel. Bring them together. God's going to be like a shepherd to his people. Okay, that remnant is an important, what goes in the blank. A remnant will be delivered. So if you're back on page 2 with your structure, under salvation prophecies of the first cycle, a remnant delivered. That theme is a super important theme in all of the Bible, and especially in the prophets. Why do you think that is, the idea of a remnant? First of all, what does that word mean, a remnant?
A portion.
Yeah, a leftover portion, right? Like if your house burns down, and someone says your house burned down, there's nothing left. There's not one remnant? There's not one scrap of something? It didn't quite burn all the way? There's got to be something left. At least the slab didn't burn, right? There's got to be something left of it. That's a remnant. So after all this punishment goes through, there's going to be a remnant. That's a big theme in the Bible because, What?
God's chosen.
God has,
His chosen people.
yes,
From the beginning of time, we'll go,
you're absolutely right. Just explain a little bit more. Okay. Well, a lot of very important things that I think you're referencing, but why, if God is going to punish his people, why must there be a remnant?
Because the Jews are God's chosen people.
Yeah, and talk about that choice. When and where did God make that choice? And to whom?
With Abraham.
With Abraham. He made some promises to Abraham.
Covenant with you.
Yeah, a covenant, exactly. I think that's what you're talking about. God made a covenant with Abraham, so then if he's going to punish them, there has to be a remnant left, or God is breaking his promise.
Jesus had to come out of that remnant.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, so there's always, every time God punishes, there's always a remnant because of his covenant. And that's going to be an important aspect of Micah also. So, questions about the first cycle specifically, or the idea of the first cycle? Like, what do you mean by a cycle? Cycle is people sin. God sends a prophet to say, don't do this. Then the prophet says, you're going to get punished because you didn't stop. And then God sends the punishment. And then God saves the remnant. And the prophet also says, you shouldn't do this sin. You're going to get punished. But there will be a remnant. There's always those parts. Yes. Pattern. Okay. The second cycle. This is where it starts to get interesting. So you can see on the page 2 of structure that it's the second cycle is chapters 3 through 5. Now, let's do 1 through 4 together. Ruth, have you read yet?
Yes.
Okay, Donna, could you read chapter 3, verses 1 through 4? It starts at the bottom of that page.
Then I said, listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel. Should you not embrace justice? You who hate good and love evil, who tear the skin of my people and the flesh from their bones. You just said 1 and 2, right?
No, all the way to 4.
Okay. Who eat my people's flesh, strip off their skin and break their bones in pieces, who chop them up like meat for the pan, like flesh for the pot. Will they cry out to the Lord? Then they will cry out to the Lord, but he will not answer them. At that time he will hide his face from them because of the evil they have done.
Okay.
That's kind of like, I no longer know you.
Yeah. So who is this prophecy against? The leaders. Very good. And what have the leaders done? Aside from cannibalism.
They rejected God.
Sorry, what's that?
They've been evil.
They've been evil, yeah. Now he poetically describes it as cannibalism. That's not literally what they're doing, though, is it? What is the cannibalism picturing? It says, you tear the skin from my people and the flesh from their bones. You eat my people's flesh. What? So the leaders are doing something very bad to the people. What might that represent?
Or devouring them, leading them down the wrong path.
Okay. Yeah, it's going to be some kind of oppression that's described as, it's like devouring them. Okay? Taking advantage of them. Very good. We have a great system for protecting the poor in America. If you can't afford a lawyer will be appointed to you. Right? We have good laws to protect the poor. They had good laws to protect the poor too. But their laws were being ignored. Because the rich could just say to the judge, hey, if you could just ignore certain laws, I'll make sure you get a new boat or whatever. whatever they wanted. I don't know. I guess depending on what town the judge lived in, he might not want a boat. But if he lived in Tiberias, he probably would. Okay. So, yeah, the leaders. They're like shepherds. Leaders are supposed to be shepherds, but they've turned into eating the sheep. Okay, 5 through 8 is the next judgment prophecy. Let's just read verse 5. Jean? Is it Jean? Read verse 5, please.
This is what the Lord said. As for the prophets who lead my people astray, if one feeds them, they proclaim peace. If he does not, they prepare to wage war against him.
Okay. So, what kind of prophets is this judgment prophecy against?
They're false prophets.
False prophets. And what's their MO? If you have something to feed me, you're going to have peace.
Prophesied for money.
Yeah. If you want to get cute, you say they're prophets for profit. Yes. They're doing it for money. Very good. And then 9 through 12. This is the last one of the second cycle. Bev, could you read verses 9 through 12 of chapter 3?
Hear this, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel, who despise justice and distort all that is right, who build Zion with bloodshed and Jerusalem with wickedness. Her leaders judge for a bribe, her priests teach for a price, and her prophets tell fortunes for money. Yet they look for the Lord's support and say, is not the Lord among us? No disaster will come upon us. Therefore, because of you, Zion will be plowed like a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of rubble, the temple hill a mound overgrown with thickets.
Okay, so who is this prophecy against? There's multiple in this one.
Leaders of Jacob.
Okay, I heard leaders, rulers, priests, good, and one more. Prophets. Okay, so the previous one focused specifically on prophets. This one is all rulers. So we had leaders, we had prophets, and now we have rulers, leaders, priests, and prophets. And what is the punishment going to be? A heap of rubble. Which city, though, will be Jerusalem. Zion will be plowed like a field. Zion is another name for Jerusalem. Jerusalem will become a heap of rubble. The temple hill, a mound overgrown with thickets. Now, to us, that sounds like just more of the same. But to them, that's like, whoa. The temple is going to be a mound overgrown with thickets? That would mean the temple is gone. But that's the place where God chose to put his name and where God chose to dwell. That was a hard pill to swallow. Much of the Old Testament is written about the psychological and spiritual blow that seeing Jerusalem taken did to the nation. They couldn't understand that because God had made promises, which he will keep. Okay, so those are the judgment prophecies of the second cycle. Now the salvation prophecies. Now there's a lot of salvation prophecies. We're not going to look at all of them. There's just too many. So let's just do verses 1 and 2 of chapter 4. I again highlighted in yellow when the salvation prophecies start, the asterisks. Lynn, could you read chapter 4, verses 1 and 2?
In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and peoples will stream to it. Many nations will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem."
Okay. So we just got done saying that the temple is going to be destroyed because of their sin. And now, bear in mind, chapter divisions are not inspired. Those were added later. So there was no verse divisions or chapter divisions or punctuation. So right after saying it's going to be destroyed, he immediately goes into, in the last days, though, the Lord's temple will, what's going to happen?
Be exalted.
It'll be established, it'll be exalted, it'll become the highest, and people will stream to it. Peoples will stream to it. So, and what are the nations going to say when they come? What are they going to say? Let's go over to this other city that's not. And why? To be taught the ways of the God of Israel. Turns out our God was fake and their God was real. Let's learn their ways. Okay, so a great hope for his people. Okay. In the next section, so exaltation of Zion is the blank on page 2 of those of 1 through 4. And then chapter 4, 6, and 7, restoration of the remnant. The lame become strong. We're not going to look at that. 4:8, restoration of Zion. I'm just doing the blanks on page 4. But before we go, well, let's go back to verse 8. It's a short one. So if you turn the page over, you can see verse 8. It's a little short section. Someone asked, who is the daughter of Zion? Those would be the people that live in Jerusalem. It says there, the former dominion will be restored to you. What does that mean? The former dominion will be restored to you. This is a salvation prophecy. What dominion did they have? They had a king. They had a king before the exile. And even in the post-exile, when they came back, they didn't have a king. They were allowed by Cyrus to go back. The Persian kings let them go back, but they sure didn't say, you're free, we don't control you anymore. They said, we'll let you go back, but we're the bosses here. But this prophecy says, the former dominion will be restored to you. Kingship will come to daughter Jerusalem. Now, I'm sure you all know the very famous passage in chapter 5. Anybody?
They will be here.
Well, very famous one is that, but you, it's on the other column directly across, 5:2. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you're small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come a ruler. Right? That's how the scribes told the Magi what town to go to, and Herod.
Where are you talking about?
It's in chapter 5, verse 2. We were looking at 4:8. If you're in the notes, it's on the left column is 4:8, and the right column is 5:2. This verse is that's how the scribes knew where the Messiah would be born, or the King of the Jews. But it's not just that one verse. It starts here. The dominion's going to be restored. Kingship will come to daughter Jerusalem. Now, this should have been a clue because Micah was prophesying when they still did have kings. They should have said, you know what? We're going to go into a time with no king. But it's going to be restored. Unfortunately, people didn't read their their scripture as much as they should. So when they came, they were shocked and appalled and said, well, God just forsook us. God didn't keep his promise. You can read, I think it's Psalm 89, when they're like, God broke his promise. Well, if they had read Micah, they would have said, no, that was part of God's plan because of our sin. The kingship's going to be destroyed, but it'll be restored. Okay. So that's, okay. Boy, I'd like to go into that, but we're going to just skip it. So, okay, so the last bit of chapter 4 is 9 through 13. On page 2, it says, the Lord's secret strategy, captivity to freedom, besieged to victory. So I'm jumping back and forth between page 2, the structure, and then the notes. Everybody following? Okay. Now chapter 5 we come to, both in the text and in the structure page. Well, you can probably see the note's going to be a promised ruler from Bethlehem. Okay. So let's just go ahead and read 5, 1 through 6. It's very famous. Let's see. Sharon, would you like to read those?
Marshal your troops now, city of troops, for a siege is laid against us. They will strike Israel's ruler on the cheek with a rod. But you, Bethlehem, I'm not sure how that's pronounced.
Ephrata.
Though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from ancient times. Therefore Israel will be abandoned till the time when she who is in labor bears a son, and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. How far am I supposed to read?
Through 6.
6. And they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth, and he will be our peace when the Assyrians invade our land and march through our fortresses. We will raise against them 7 shepherds, even 8 commanders, who will rule the land of Assyria with the sword, the land of Nimrod with drawn sword. He will deliver us from the Assyrians when they invade our land and march across our borders.
So, Assyria is coming and does come during Micah's ministry. And by the time he's putting together this book, Assyria has come. But someday, the king of Jerusalem will rule over Assyria. Now, I'm going to pause a minute. I want you to think about, okay, so for us, we're like, yeah, it was bad, but God was planning to send Jesus. And so that's great. Jesus is the king for us, and he's going to be the king forever. But let's, for a minute, put our knowledge aside and just think about these people sitting here. Assyria has taken them over, and they're reading this, or probably hearing it read, because most people didn't have individual copies. They're hearing it read, and they're hearing, someday we're going to get a king, and it's going to take over Assyria, but a lot of these prophecies say in the last day. Well, great, but like, I got my whole life here to live under this yoke of slavery and captivity. It's a little bit like what, when Jesus says he's going to raise Lazarus, his sister's like, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection at the last day. But I'm sad now. For the rest of my life, I live without my brother. So how is this future state a hope for the people living then? Well, there's a couple things, but the point I want to make right now, and we'll make other points about this later, but the point I want to make right now is that knowing the destination actually changes the way you perceive the journey. In other words, your car seat feels more uncomfortable when you're driving somewhere to go be executed. But it feels great if you're going there to be crowned king or something. Do you see what I mean?
We're kind of feeling that now. Where we are in the world and what's happening in the world and knowing the promise and the hope. It's sort of a comparison.
Yeah, it's almost as though
we're not in slavery and bondage.
Yeah,
but there's a hope out there.
It's tricky. Yeah, I guess the best use of that would be to say it would be easy to get depressed if you listen to the news all the time. But knowing how it's all going to turn out sort of guards you against that depression. It's like, for a sports analogy, my dad he tapes the game. I like to watch it not knowing, right? So I don't look at his texts until the game's over. But he tapes the game, checks the score, and then if they win, he'll watch the game. Because then, no matter how bad it looks, he's like, it's okay, I know they're going to win. So something's going to happen. I'm not worried.
Been there, done that.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense. I don't see anything wrong with it.
Well,
you wouldn't believe all the unwatched USC games I ever
to me, it takes the excitement out of it. Because I like to not know. But he just says his heart can't handle it anymore. So he doesn't want the excitement. But think about it. When it's real life, you like to know the ending. Well, only if the ending's winning. But it really does affect the whole thing. You're not, in the game analogy, you're not worried. You're like, oh no, they fumbled at the last minute. But it's okay. I know it's going to turn out good. So that's the point now. Knowing the ending, knowing, that God wins in the end allows us to say, well, you know what? That's okay. I can be oppressed now. I can handle some persecution now. I can handle some ridicule now because I know I'm winning in the end. Well, I know my team captain's going to win in the end, and I'm just going along for the ride. Okay, so that is cycles 1 and 2. Yeah, you missed some blanks because I didn't do them. Sorry. Let's look at just 5, 7 through 9. It's not very long, and I think it'll shed some light. Donna, would you like to read?
5, 7 through 9, the remnant.
Mm-hmm.
The remnant of Jacob will be in the midst of many peoples, like dew from the Lord, like showers on the grass, which do not wait for anyone or depend on man. The remnant of Jacob will be among the nations, in the midst of many peoples, like a lion among the beasts of the forest, like a young lion among flocks of sheep, which mauls and mangles as it goes, and no one can rescue.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird prophecy, isn't it? And then verse 9 also.
Your hand will be lifted up in triumph over your enemies, and all your foes will be destroyed.
Okay, so what are the things that the people, the remnant's going to be compared to? A lion. Good, there's 3 total. One is a lion.
The beasts of the forest.
Well, a lion among the beasts.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. What was the other one?
Flocks of sheep. Oh,
No, again, like a lion among flocks of sheep.
Your foes?
It's in verse 7. The remnant's compared.
Like dew from the Lord, like a shower from the Lord.
Yeah. So there's several different interpretations of this, but they're going to be in the midst of the people. Here's the thing. It says the dew and the showers, which do not wait for anyone or depend on man. If you have something out in the grass that you don't want to get rusty from the dew, and you run out and you say, wait, don't come yet. I got to gather up all these metal things before you come, dew. It's coming. It takes no notice of you. The dew and the rain, you can go up and say, don't rain. I have to gather in all these things. They'll be ruined if you rain. Don't rain yet. If it's going to rain, it's going to rain, regardless of you. So this is the point here. The remnant among the nations is victorious. Is the blank there? It comes suddenly. It's unstoppable. The dew and the showers are unstoppable. The lion among the beast, the lion among sheep is unstoppable. It's just, as it goes, it is just destroying. It is just tearing them apart. That's the image. The remnant is going to be victorious and just defeat their enemies like a lion among a flock of sheep. Now, that doesn't sound great to us, to our Western ear. Oh, I don't want to be like a lion among a flock of sheep. That's mean. But if you had your family members raped and murdered before your eyes, then suddenly a lion among a flock of sheep sounds like the right thing that needs to happen. Okay. Let's just look at 5:14 to finish this section. 5:14. Bev, could you read that?
I will uproot from among you your Asherah poles when I demolish your cities.
Okay, so yes, the cities are going to be demolished, but also their pagan worship items will also be uprooted. So the Lord purges and protects his kingdom. Okay, we have just enough time to hit the biggest point of the third cycle. It's the same cycle, judgment prophecies and then salvation prophecies, but there is inserted in it a personal testimony. Just one verse right in the middle. And it comes right after a dirge. We don't really have a lot of dirges anymore, but it's all about Israel's misery. So let's look at chapter 7. We have to skip a lot of pages to get to chapter 7. It's pretty dark. Verse 7:5. Well, let's just read 7, 5, and 6. Lynn, can you read those?
Do not trust a neighbor, put no confidence in a friend. Even with the woman who lies in your embrace, guard the words of your lips. For a son dishonors his father, a daughter rises up against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the members of his own household.
So, yes, and chapter 7 starts, what misery is mine? It's a bad time. It's a poem of misery. And then verse 7, stuck right between the judgment and the salvation, you get this personal testimony from Micah. Loretta, could you read that? Verse 7? 7:7.
But as for me, I watch and hope for the Lord. I wait for God, my Savior. My God will hear me.
Yeah, so Micah stands there as an example to us. Yes, knowing the end helps, but when it's really, really dark, even knowing the end isn't always too much of a comfort. But Micah says, I watch in hope. Now that doesn't mean he's watching something. That means he's guarding, he's keeping, I'm going to stay like a watchman. I watch and hope for the Lord. I'm going to just have to wait for God, my Savior. My God will hear me. So even in the darkest times, we still have hope because our God hears us. Okay. I would like to, by the way, the salvation prophecies of the third cycle is a song of victory. We're not going to look at that at all, though. I'd like to spend our last bit on the Lord's case against Israel. So I jumped ahead there, but in chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, sorry that we're not going in perfect order, but I think this is very powerful. Marty, could you read chapter 6, verse 1? It's the beginning of the third cycle, I know. I'm sorry.
Listen to what the Lord says. Stand up, plead my case before the mountains. Let the hills hear what you have to say.
Yeah, keep going.
Hear you mountains, the Lord's accusation.
Okay. The Lord's case against his people and the Lord's accusation. That's what's coming. Okay? Now let's turn the page. For the Lord has a case against his people. He is lodging a charge against Israel. Okay, so just remember, this is God's case against them. It's going to sound like an odd case. If I was giving a case against someone, I'd say, well, first he punched me in the face, and then he took my car. Listen to what God's case is against them. Kathy, could you read, it's just 3 and 4.
My people, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Answer me. I brought you up out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, also Aaron and Miriam.
And verse 5 too.
My people, remember what Balak, king of Moab, plotted, and what Balaam, son of Beor, answered. Remember your journey from Shittim to Gilgal, Gilgal, that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord.
Okay, sorry you had to read those names, but what's important here is that God's case, if you had to sum up what his case was in a very short sentence, what would it be?
Like you've done everything you said you would do.
Yeah, I was so good to you. I was so good to you. I mean, do you see it's an odd case, isn't it? And then it goes into the most famous part of Micah, where he says, verse 6, with what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression? Shall I sacrifice my child, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? What could I possibly bring to God? The case is that he was so good. How do you come to stand in the presence of such a good God? What could you possibly bring? That's why it gets to a crazy exaggeration. 10,000 rivers of olive oil. Those were the types of sacrifices they would bring. Olive oil and rams, or even something horrible. The ultimate is your firstborn child. Would you sacrifice that? Would that be enough? There's nothing you could ever bring to be able to stand in God's presence. Such a good God. And yet, his kindness goes so far as to say, you know what? I told you what to do. And it's really simple. And this is the most famous verse in the book. Loretta, could you read verse 8?
He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
That's all I'm requiring. That's a summation, really, of the whole Old Testament law. That's it. Do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And you didn't do that. You didn't do it. You broke my covenant. So God is so good to them, and so good to them to show them what he wants. I don't want your firstborn child. I don't want a bunch of rich sacrifices that you can't afford. This is all I want. That's it. So we benefit from, seeing a bit of God's personality and what he wants from a person in that verse. But we also hear the Lord's sadness in the fact that no matter how good he is to them, no matter how easy he makes it for them, they break his covenant. Okay, so that is the book, and then the very last page of the notes, it says, what biblical covenants do you see reference to in Micah? Well, what are the four? Well, there's more than four. But what are the four? We're not counting Noah's. Not counting Noah's covenant. What are the four biblical Old Testament covenants? Abraham's covenant. And Moses is next. The Davidic covenant. And there's actually one more in the Old Testament. A prophecy of a covenant that doesn't come until Jesus. It's called the New Covenant. Jeremiah prophesies, and then Jesus says, this is the new covenant in my blood. Jeremiah's prophecy is coming true in Jesus. So, if you look straight above in your notes, the very last verse of the book, it says, "You will be faithful to Jacob and show love to Abraham as you pledged on oath to our ancestors in days long ago." So he is going to keep his promises to Abraham. So that the reference there would be 720. So Abraham is the blank on the left, and then 720. And then the next one is Moses. The next line down, Moses is on the left. And we don't have time to look at the promise, but in Deuteronomy 30, the first 4 verses, God says, if you don't keep my covenant, you're going to get the curses. If you keep it, you get these blessings, and he lists them. If you don't keep it, you get these curses. And then after all that, you still don't keep it, I'm going to send you into exile, but then I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to bring back a remnant. So, real quick, let me just read you Micah 1:6. Where did it go? "Therefore I will make Samaria a heap of rubble, a place for planting vineyards. I will pour her stones into the valley and lay bare her foundations." Okay, that's not it. It was the sending into exile. I have the wrong reference there. Anyway, sorry. In chapter 1, he says he's going to send him into exile. And so he keeps his promise to Moses. But then, well, these notes are confusing. Sorry. But then in 4:6, so he says, I'm going to send you guys into exile. But then in chapter 4, verse 6, he says, here it is. "In that day, declares the Lord, I will gather the lame. I will assemble the exiles, those I have brought to grief." So exactly what he said to Moses, he's going to do. So Micah is proving that God is keeping Abrahamic covenant, Mosaic covenant, and then of course the Davidic covenant, number 3, line 3. He says, a ruler is going to come out of Bethlehem. Jerusalem, the city of David, will be destroyed, but Bethlehem, David's origin city, is going to produce a ruler. And then the new covenant, we won't go into the references, but basically all the aspects of the new covenant, Micah says, will be fulfilled. He will forgive them. That's 7:18. You can look right up above there. Who pardons sins and forgives transgressions. He will forgive them. They will know God, and they will keep his law in their hearts. Both of those are from chapter 6. So, Micah has all these cycles of judgment and salvation, and all of it centers around God keeping his promises, the dark side of his promises and the wonderful, gracious side of his promises.